Is the 2019 iMac with the Core i9 and Vega 48 the iMac Pro killer, or is it just an underwhelming spec bump? So behind me is the best spec'd 2019 iMac you can buy. Not quite the top spec, the most expensive model, but it is the best. This iMac has the Core i9, 32GB of RAM, the 1TB solid-state drive, and the upgraded Vega 48 graphics. This configuration is probably what a lot of people are eyeing, and it costs from Apple $4,250. That's an interesting price. If you take a 15-inch MacBook Pro and configure it with the Core i9, 32GB, Vega 20 graphics, and 1TB solid state, you get $4,250. Also, if you head over to the Apple refurbished store and check out the iMac Pro, you'll see a base model with the 8-core, 32GB, Vega 56, and 1TB SSD for, you guessed it, $4,250. These three computers are an interesting comparison. They all have premium processors, 32 gigs of RAM, 1TB solid-state drives, and Vega graphics. The MacBook Pro is obviously the least powerful, but it's not really the same category, and laptops almost always have worse performance per dollar when compared to desktops, so let's set that aside. That leaves us with an interesting question. Core i9 iMac or refurbished iMac Pro? If it were as simple as that, with all things being equal and the price being the same, I would say the iMac Pro is obviously better. You're going to get better graphics, faster solid-state drives, UHS 2 card readers, more Thunderbolt ports, ECC RAM, better cooling, and it's space gray, which is pretty. So that'll do it for today's video. I'll see you guys in the next one. But it's not that simple. First of all, you shouldn't spend $4,250 on this iMac. Do not pay Apple for 32GB of RAM when you could very easily do it yourself. The RAM that I bought has been going on sale a lot. You can get it for around $180, which yields a pretty fantastic savings of $420. So the real cost of this machine, if you do it right, is $3,830. So with a savings of $400, what exactly are we looking at here? If we compare the i9 9900K to the 8-core Xeon from the iMac Pro, on paper, the i9 should be more powerful. In Geekbench, the 8-core iMac Pro scores about 33,000, whereas the 9900K should score up to around 37,000. That's getting close to the 10-core iMac Pro, but this iMac in practice doesn't quite achieve the full potential of the Core i9. I got an average score around 33,000 in Geekbench, exactly on par with the iMac Pro. Despite the fact that the i9 will still be faster than a base iMac Pro in exporting due to its Intel QuickSync support, there's no way around the fact that this iMac doesn't get everything it can out of that Core i9. However, that being said, we do not have the same thermal throttling issues that we saw on the 2018 i9 MacBook Pro. I ran Cinebench R20 back-to-back almost 20 times, and the i9 was able to maintain above base clock speeds around 3.7 GHz while staying shy of its T-junction of 100 degrees Celsius, if only by about 10 degrees. In short bursts while testing in Geekbench or exporting 4K video, the i9 climbed most of the way to its 5 GHz turbo speed, maxing out at around 4.85 GHz. Again, not bad. Also, this was achieved with minimal fan noise. I never achieved peak fan speed, and the machine was not uncomfortably loud. Honestly, it's pretty impressive that this chip is able to run at peak load without maxing the fan speeds. In fact, most of the times, the fans were at idle and the chip was running under its T-junction. This is not only rare for an Apple product, but completely contrary to the way I predicted this machine would turn out. I predicted that it would have terrible throttling, but as it turns out, there's none. However, I do suspect some funny business is going on here. When I ran Cinebench, I noticed an odd phenomenon. When you start a test, the clock speed jumps to the high 4 GHz range, and the power usage jumps to 120 watts. but very quickly the clocks settle down to 3.7 GHz and the power draw to 80 watts. After running 3 tests, the fan stayed at idle almost all of the time, only jumping up a few hundred RPM for about 10 seconds in the second run. I decided to take down the average temps and scores over 3 runs, then I installed a fan controller and maxed out the fans and ran the experiment again. The exact same pattern persisted with the power draw and the clock speed. However, the temperature and average scores improved. With the default fan curve, I saw average Cinebench scores of 3,946 at an average temperature of 87 degrees Celsius. But with the fans maxed out, I saw average scores of 4,004 with an average temperature of 79 degrees. The performance gain was negligible, but the temps improved significantly. What this tells us is that Apple is likely holding the i9 back at its base clock so it can keep the fans low and the temps down. This isn't all bad news, at least the i9 is performing as it should and it's not thermal throttling. But if Apple were willing to crank the fans a little, they could definitely get more out of this chip, even with the same cooling system that it already has. Now, this isn't to say that the Core i9 isn't worth it. If we compare the results from my Cinebench test to my 2015 iMac, you'll notice a very significant difference. On the 2015, as soon as you start running Cinebench, the CPU temperatures climb up to the T-junction of 100 Celsius, and the processor starts to throttle, with the clock speeds dropping below the 4 GHz base speed. With that in mind, I recommend the Core i9 upgrade, as it's a very significant performance improvement over the Core i5, and there's no thermal throttling despite the much more powerful processor. Add to that the fact that this isn't an unreasonably priced upgrade. It costs either $500 on the mid-tier or $400 on the upper tier to upgrade to the Core i9, which is honestly not terrible considering that a Core i9 9900K retails for about $525 on Amazon. The Vega 48, on the other hand, is a polarizing upgrade. While the i9 is decently priced, the Vega 48 is way too expensive. It does not provide $450 worth of performance improvements. Even its newer, cooler architecture and the newfangled HBM2 memory can't make up for the fact that it's just not as powerful as it should be over the Radeon 580X. You can tell Apple didn't want this chip to get too close to the iMac Pro. In my gaming test, I determined that this card performs a little bit better than a GTX 1060, roughly. Not bad performance by any means, but keep in mind, this card costs almost as much as an RTX 2070, and it's an upgrade. I just don't think it's worth it for a lot of people. Okay, conclusion time. If we compare this iMac to the iMac Pro, it's a bit of a tricky situation. If you decide to forego the Vega graphics because the performance gains aren't that great, and you decide that you don't need a full terabyte of storage, you can do fine with external storage, you can get into this machine with the Core i9 and 32 gigabytes of RAM for $2,980, which yields a savings of $1,300 over the base iMac Pro for very similar CPU performance. At that price point, with that configuration, while you do compromise on the graphics and lesser storage, I'd say the i9 iMac is going to be worth it. However, if you need the 1TB solid-state drive and the Vega graphics, I think the iMac Pro is worth the extra $400 to get those improvements I mentioned at the beginning when we consider that the CPU performance is similar, and they both have 1TB solid-state drives and 32 gigs of RAM. This iMac is not an iMac Pro killer. There is no configuration where you're going to get better performance from this iMac than even the base iMac Pro, something which I think was very intentional. If anything, this iMac provides a smoother transition from the home computer-oriented entry-level iMacs to the professional workstation-grade iMac Pro, which in the end is better for the consumer as it provides more gradient when picking out a device. Now before I go, I just want to address the disappointment that a lot of people had that the design hasn't changed. It carries over the same thicker bezels, the same 2012 7-year-old design, the same 8 gigabytes of RAM as standard, and Fusion drives. A lot of people were kind of bummed about that. However, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that this is likely the last of this generation of iMac. And the last of a generation is often considered the best when you look at Apple. People consider the mid-2012 unibody MacBook Pro to be fantastic, and the same sentiment applies for the mid-2015 MacBook Pro before the Touch Bar came along and arguably mucked the whole thing up. So, consider that. This may be the mid-2012 of iMacs. Time will tell. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Miani if you get the chance. Also, please consider joining my subreddit if you have any questions or discussions that you would like to have. And with that, I will see you guys in the next video.